Ages ago, when the world was different, the South Pacific contained many islands we have never known. Then, as now, the floor of the ocean rose and fell when volcanic pressures fluctuated. A violent upthrusting that created new islands would be followed by an imperceptible subsidence, which slowly dragged the newborn lands back below the surface of the sea. About 10,000 years ago, one such mountainous island rose above the warm waters near the equator. Around its edges swarmed a multitude of remarkable animals, the coral polyps, taking refuge in deep water. Slowly they began to build a calciferous reef, each new polyp adding his tiny limestone skeleton to those that had died before. The polyps had chosen their new home with studied care. The water temperature must never go below 68 degrees, or the tiny animals would freeze. The base of their building could be no deeper than 120 feet, or they would drown. The water must be salty, but not too salty, and it had to contain an abundance of plankton, that microscopic marine life on which coral feeds. Most important of all, the water had to be fresh and free of sand, for any kind of sedimentation would suffocate the polyps. Working slowly, dying by the multiple billions so that their limestone structures could become rock, the polyps clung to the shores of the new island, and in some years raised their reef as much as 3 inches. Of course, the highest point was still far under water, and no eye could have discerned that a miracle had already begun to take place. For now the ever-violent ocean bed began steadily to subside. In 1,000 years it fell perhaps 3 feet, but slowly the island was settling into the sea. Unseen, the coral continued building. Now it was less than 50 feet below the surface. Then one day the dying island exploded into cataclysmic fury. Its volcanic flames lighted the sky for many years. But as the fierce heat died out, the entire ocean bed, island, reefs, coral, and all, shivered and sank deeper into the sea. The coral was not drowned. Through many centuries it continued to build, until a final day when, with some unchronicled gasp, the last fragment of the original island disappeared forever. More than 1,000 years elapsed, and in that time the coral on the sunken reef continued its patient growth. It was now close to the surface, and one day a solitary limestone pinnacle, no bigger than a pencil, broke the waves. A score of decades passed. A bird skimming the empty wastes of ocean could have seen a thin, shining ribbon of white coral. A piece of driftwood caught fast and rotted. Sand began to collect, and finally a seed drifted 2,000 miles across the waves and found lodgment. A casuarina tree began to grow. It was washed away. More soil collected. Igneous rock from some recent volcano floated mysteriously to the almost-born island. Sand edged the inner shore of the reef. A coconut arrived, a pandanus. In 2,000 years, a new fragment of earth had been created. Now the entire reef, miles in circumference, threatened to break the surface. Within the circle, the seawater became dirty, and all polyps on the inner shore died. Those on the outside now did the work, building the reef ever outward from its center. A new violence, a new upheaval of the ocean floor, and the entire reef was lifted 20 feet into the air. Here and there, weak portions crumbled into the pounding sea, leaving narrow channels into the lagoon. At other points, where coral skeletons had been piled highest, substantial islands rose like a cluster of jewels strung along the golden strands of the reef. At last, the miracle was complete. A coral atoll, circular in form, subtended a shallow lagoon. On the outer edge, giant green combers of the Pacific thundered in majestic fury. Inside, the water was blue and calm. Along the shore of the lagoon, palm trees bent their towering heads as the wind directed, and after 1,000 more years, brown men in frail canoes came to the atoll and decided it should be their home.